Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well, thank you. All doing everything just like it's supposed to go.
Happy Monday, yes.
But it's still early in the day.
Yeah, that's true.
So we'll learn a lot during the day, a lot of the big things going on. You do know we have a new president.
Yeah, we do.
But he's trying to gain authority or notoriety. I don't know which one he's working on. But things have changed. I mean, in a way, though, if you weren't paying a lot of attention like we do, you'd say, if you're just a casual observer, say, hey, things are looking pretty good.
Yeah.
COVID is gone, and they're opening up again. The country's come to life again, and Washington D.C. is secure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Keeping the troops there, not just for the riot that didn't come, but just for the future. Yeah. They're going to keep it there. There's a trial coming up. It might be controversial. I understand they're trying to impeach somebody that's not in office. I wonder if they're allowed to do that.
They'll elect him again so they can impeach him again.
Yeah. Well, anyway, they do it, but they keep people on their toes. But we asked the question that maybe the sun changes, which on the surface we look at, there's some of the things we believe in. Yeah. Open up. Is this magic? Is this just a political stunt, or what has caused this? So it's people look at this and they say, well, maybe this is something good, but too often it's really misleading. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what it said, because all of a sudden, and I think you have proof of this, mm-hmm. You guaranteed me this was true, that there were some people who were saying this, and then the next day they did something else, as if overnight it changed. But the one thing that when you read those headlines, we can't go too far on bragging that they're coming our way, because I think it is a benefit, because they're going in the right direction. But the whole thing is when you read between the lines, it's a little bit of baby steps. Yeah. What you want to do is something like, if you're serious about it, you look for leadership maybe from the governor of Florida. Just do it. Yeah. Or the way the governor of South Dakota handled it. Just legalize liberty and let them take care of their problem. And this is an argument I made for years, is that if you go toward a free society, you really don't have to worry about the details of what people do and how they do it. Things get better. The economy gets better. The people are happier. There's less violence. But today we live with a society where the government becomes the most violent. Yeah. And there's a big stink about who's telling the truth, and we have to have censors and all this. But one thing, I wonder what they'd say if they knew about my poster in my office, the bumper sticker, and say, don't steal. Government might not like that. Yeah. They don't like the competition, because that's probably over the top.
You'll get fact-checked.
But it's funny to a way. So maybe they'll leave us alone on that. Say it is true. That's one thing, though. There's a lot of truth in there, and the reason I use it, I think it engulfs everything. Because everything government does is with force and theft and guns. Yeah. They have to take stuff and pass it out. It's all political. So even this stunt, well, we better not say stunt. Whatever is going on right now, things look like they're doing it a little bit better. They probably, a few people think, hey, this is it. It is going to get better. But of course, we argued the case, if they'd have done a lot less, would have all been a lot better. The states, which you have said many times on this program, the states that had the least amount of regulation had the least amount of penalties, economic penalties and social penalties, and the results were medically no worse, and sometimes a lot less worse. That people were better off.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We agreed last night that we wanted to talk about this idea that somehow Biden cured COVID, because the news is just good news all over the place. Only a couple of days after he was inaugurated, and is it magic? Well, we woke up this morning to Jeff Tucker had a good piece, and he was actually thinking the same way we were, and he has a piece up on AIER.com, I think it is, with a similar theme. But he asked the question, do science and politics really line up so well? And that's a question we had. But we want to look at what we're talking about because we were noticing the headlines over the past week. And let's look at the first clip. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, partial indoor dining can restart on Friday. This is just 2 days after the inauguration. Let's look next at the next one. Indoor dining expected to be allowed in Chicago starting Saturday, 1 day later. Let's do one more. Let's do a couple more, actually. Gretchen Whitmer, who shut the state down and wouldn't even let you buy some seeds for your garden. She eases Michigan restaurant restrictions 2 days after Joe Biden inauguration. Let's do one more. Oh my goodness, Gavin Newsom, gruesome Newsom. In a huge step, California governor will lift stay-at-home orders across the state. That's brand new news today. Let's keep going. There's three more that we're going to look at in this section just to show. U.S. sees record single-day drop in COVID hospitalizations in Bloomberg. That's on the 22nd. And this is a dramatic, and this is, people put this up on Twitter. Here's a dramatic way that the media is buying into this, Dr. Paul. Hey, maybe it's just honest reporting, but it looks interesting. Here's a look at the next one. This is from NPR, the pulse of the deep state. Okay, here is the 19th, the day before the inauguration. As death rate accelerates, U.S. records 400,000 lives lost to the coronavirus. Doom and gloom, it sounds terrible. And let's do the next clip. Just 2 days later, 1 day after the inauguration, current deadly U.S. coronavirus surge has peaked, researchers say. So we're laughing, but it's not funny. But you do see the significance. Also, CNN has magically removed the COVID death tracker that they used to have constantly throughout this past year under the president. And also, and Tucker mentions this, Jeff Tucker mentions this, also significant is the world, and we talked about this last week, the World Health Organization is insisting that the PCR threshold be turned down because you're getting all these false positives. That might explain the fact that there was this huge peak recently that it may actually be the flu season plus a false positive test gives this COVID
Daniel, I'm surprised that you're surprised because we had a good guy there at CDC, makes a lot of money, so he must be good. He must be very smart. He's been there for years after years, but it's not like he's an average bureaucrat, but he's been in charge and he's had a lot of control. I would say he is the face of everything about what's going on, except I don't even know if he probably might not even know about him backing off a little bit. This might annoy him, but he makes a couple bucks, doing it. I think it's like $400,000. That's pretty good. That might be more than the president makes for all we know. So he makes a lot of money, and I see nowhere where he's been very much contributing anything to safety and security and health. Not because he has nothing to offer. It's because an individual can't do that. That's like the question they asked me. What would you tell the Federal Reserve to do about interest rates next week if you were in charge? I said, I can't tell, because you shouldn't have anybody telling anybody about what interest rates should be. And that's sort of the way you deal with health matters and economic matters and freedom matters, and even this whole issue of masks. This is backing off, and like I mentioned in my opening statement, they're backing off just baby steps. But what about masks? The issue that he made on his executive order on masks is exactly the opposite. He was cracking down. Anybody who was on federal property had to wear it, and we've already seen pictures of how insane some of these pictures are, because you might catch a guy out in the mountains by himself fishing and he'd have his mask on, that sort of thing. But this is likely to technically say that the military people, even when they're not on active duty or when they're on active duty out of the country, they have to wear their mask. So it's the principle they need to understand. We want to show people that they're touching on the principle of a little bit of independence, and they're moving in this direction, saying, well, it looks like it failed, but really it was just the Republicans. And now that we have a Democrat in charge, everything is going to be better. And I guess there's going to be a lot of people buying into this, because 99% of stuff that comes off most of the television is going to be just to support the idea that government is our savior.
Yeah, you mentioned Fauci. I don't know if you used his name, but no, Fauci makes $417,608. This was reported in Forbes. the highest paid individual in the entire federal government. So, but he's no dummy. You said that maybe he's upset that the things are opening. Actually, a few days before the inauguration, he said the darkest times are coming, the darkest winter is coming. And then right after the inauguration, he said, oh, cases seem to be plateauing. So no, he knows what side his bread is buttered on, and it's buttered very, very lavishly. But here's a couple of other things. This is actually something, this is pretty remarkable. This is from Jeff Tucker's article. Let's put up this next clip. This is Massachusetts, and this is actually where we start, instead of celebrating, we start getting a little bit angry. Here's from Jeff Tucker's article. More remarkably, Massachusetts chief epidemiologist admits that the lockdowns didn't achieve their goal. Shira Dorn of Tufts said, quote, businesses and restaurants have not been shown to be a significant source of spread of infection, and it's not clear that the additional measures that were instituted in November and December actually helped. Jeff Tucker adds his comment, so sorry we ruined your holidays and lives. And that's tongue-in-cheek, but actually just do the next clip really quick before we turn it back, Dr. Paul, because this is something very close to your heart, I know, and this is from, I think, the New York Times. Surge of student suicides pushes Las Vegas schools to reopen. So, yes, it did ruin people's lives, and it ruined a lot of kids' lives.
You know, with the information we have now, I think it's very clearly political, and it's worth a discussion, and people should be challenged. If they're challenged by what we said, they should decide themselves, you know, is this political or not? And it sure looks like it. And yet people have suffered. You know, the lockdown in general, people have died, people have lost their jobs, they've lost their properties, and on and on and on. And now the information is coming out about how many people got worse illnesses by wearing those masks, and they were just trapping in the bacteria and the whole thing. That the conditions actually got much worse. But you know, somebody was guilty. You say, well, no, they didn't commit a crime. They're just guilty of stupidity. But there should be a liability.
Yeah.
Now you say, well, the person come back and said, yes, they should be kicked out in the next election. But what if there's total control of the media?
Yeah.
And what happens if it's somebody that is unelected and the media and the country and both parties say, well, CDC, that's independent, that is never political, and just keep people in there forever and ever. So it's something that it isn't easily corrected, because I think what has to be addressed is how much should the government be involved in dealing with anything?
Yeah,
you know,
anything.
And you could start with monetary policy all the way down to control of religious matters, to schools and all that. Right now, I see the schools aren't going to be open easily. There was one report where they did a polling of the unions, and they said, absolutely, don't open up like the restaurants. We're taking care of kids, you know, and they don't want that open, and they're the strongest opponents to it. And that's why some people suggest, which I sort of endorse, separate education from the schools, especially from the government, especially the federal government, because it becomes a monster. But basically, things can do better with a lot less government for many, many reasons. And now we're moving back. They had to admit things were so bad, and the way I look at it, was so bad, they needed to turn it around. But why not play a little game with politics? Why don't we just give credit to Biden? Look what he did in no time, because Trump caused it all.
Yeah.
You know, that's a little bit of demagoguing that's over the top.
Well, here's another suggestion that it might be politics. We got a lot of question marks in our title, fact checker, so we're questioning things. But here's a suggestion that it might be politics. And you remember, Dr. Paul, all those months last year, you were relentlessly hammered for suggesting that there's such a thing as natural immunity. That when people who are less vulnerable get it, that acts as a block to those that are more vulnerable who should be protected. Hammered, fact check. We're insane, we're terrible. This is the Washington Post. The Washington Post, I think Tucker put it in his piece. Johns Hopkins professor Marty McCory published an article in the Washington Post, and here's a quote from it. Many medical experts have been dismissive of natural immunity due to prior infection, but there is overwhelming data showing that COVID-19 reinfections are rare. And when they do occur, the infection is often mild. And when I read that, it reminded me of the exchange between Senator Paul and Fauci in a hearing, where basically Fauci acted as if Senator Paul had just dropped down from Mars by suggesting there was such a thing as herd immunity. And now he said, I've never heard of that before. And now we're seeing even the Washington Post, the establishment, Jeff Bezos' paper, the establishment saying herd immunity, natural immunity.
What are the odds of Fauci sending us a note of a bit of apology and say, you guys were right and we finally paid attention to it?
He can make a tax-deductible contribution to the Ron Paul Institute.
Yeah.
We would accept that.
Well, I don't think he'd be sending us a note either.
But this is another interesting, going back to a couple of clips. Here's before and after. Here's Biden before the election. We're 8 months into this pandemic and Donald Trump still doesn't have a plan to get this virus under control. I do. And here's Joe Biden a couple of days ago. There is nothing we can do to change the trajectory of the pandemic in the next several months, which is what we've been saying. That's a long way of saying virus gonna virus, which we've always said. And here's Amash. Justin Amash has a good comment. He quotes Biden saying, there's nothing we can do. And then Amash says, haven't we been told for months that restrictions and mandates were necessary to change the trajectory of the pandemic in the next several months? So that is quite interesting. And we talk about there's nothing to do to change the trajectory. One more, and here's, as you suggested earlier, Dr. Paul, California and Florida. Let's take a look at this. This is from the Daily Mail. California, massive restrictions, everything shut, everything closed. Florida, DeSantis opened up in September and wasn't even as closed before that. And look at the difference. California's economy totally decimated. Florida booming. Everyone is moving to Florida because they want to live normal lives. So
yeah, at least that still exists. It probably won't exist forever because they've given up on the interstate commerce clause, because that was meant that you can't regulate it and people should be able to pick up and vote with their boots and go next door and go to the state that taxes less, and that's a good it's a good backstop, and the founders understood this. But now it is considered by many that it's a national government and everything is rules, and they mean nothing. These executive orders, I wonder if anybody will ever go through and look at Republican and Democratic executive orders. If there's 1,000 executive orders in the past so many years, probably about 950 were unnecessary. I mean, there are times to fulfill legitimate federal law, you write an executive order, and I'm thinking about national defense or military or something. But this whole thing of regulating and running the country under executive orders, but they're important. It was proven. The other day it was important. So if you say all around there, these aren't too important, but immediately he still had his mask on from the inauguration, sits down at this table and starts signing. Hey, what is this? What am I signing?
Yeah. Just sign it, sir. Just sign it.
And they have that on record.
Yeah.
But the executive order is bad news. The executive order should be your household, and your friends and your neighbors and your moral head leadership come from a church or some spiritual leader, but not from the federal government. And it's all because the responsibility is taken over by government. And most people, I don't know how they do. If they've never thought of it before, they're still not in a position where they say, well, the average person on the street that went along, well, I'm scared, I have to be careful. How many of them look at this and say, hey, maybe I shouldn't have believed him in the first place? But, they can control this so much. The headline is not one here, and one here. It's boom. Everybody is on target. But pretty good discipline, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to passing out the propaganda.
you know, I think a lot of these people who bought it hook, line, and sinker are actually going to be more angry with you and with people like us that, you know, were against it, because nobody wants to admit they were duped. And certainly there were people in that period that should have been careful, that needed to be careful, who had problems and they need to stay away. But the majority of people who weren't says that, you know, I hate to see these kids in their 20s and teens wearing these masks, because they're really not, unless they have underlying conditions. But I think they're going to be angrier with us for being right all along than they are with the people who destroyed their lives, and that's pretty sad. But I'm going to circle back to one thing you said, and it's only because I have some clips on it that I don't want to miss. But here's, let's look at this next clip really quick. Here's Fauci, the highest paid employee in the entire federal government from Forbes, almost $500,000, a little over $400,000 he makes. He's got to be pretty good, Dr. Paul, if he makes that kind of money. He has got to be impeccable, his judgment, his knowledge of the science. Well, I don't know. Let's look at this next clip. Here is New York, daily cases per million. If you look there on December 8th, here's Fauci saying, New York has the best response. And look at those cases jump. And let's look at one more, and there's plenty of these examples. Here he is with Vermont. Here he is on December 8th. Fauci says, this is one of the best responses. Boom. The mask mandates and everything, boom, it went way up. So not that great.
Well, let's talk a minute about how you solve these problems, and you alluded to it in your last answer. And that has to do with there's a problem out there, and we have to deal with it, and we haven't taken the position that there's no virus. Just ignore it. Just go about your business and forget it. You even mentioned many, many times on this program, we both mentioned, you know, it's a serious, serious problem. That's why you don't want the government involved. You know, and when you have illness, to me, of course, I'm very, very biased on this, that I still am so old-fashioned that the best standard for medicine is the doctor-patient relationship, with the doctor that's honest with the patient, willing to get the help as necessary, and they discuss it. But that's ruined. It's gone. I mean, the middleman is the insurance companies and the government agent, and that's why it costs about 3 times more than it should. But when you have something about, you know, a virus is spreading, it's serious, you got to deal with it, people can die from it. So that it's not an indication that you could spend trillions of dollars, lock them down, throw the key away, and they just go on and they do that. But just think of, well, you know, the whole thing about nursing homes. I don't think it would have taken that long. It takes the politicians to put a bunch of people in a nursing home and they all die.
Yeah.
Or a lot of them die,
Yeah.
and then they figure out, well, maybe that was the wrong thing to do. I think those kind of things can be worked out much faster. And right now, we still have a lot of sorting out to go, and it should be done through the individual. People should have the right information. They should never depend on the government for the right information. They should deal with the possibility of using a vaccine. Maybe a good idea, maybe a bad idea, but boy, right now, people are at least agreeing with us, you ought to be more cautious about it, because vaccines have done a lot of harm. Vaccines have saved lives too, and it certainly was worth something in smallpox and polio and a few things. But now, but those things can be worked out much faster, and there's not such a penalty for making mistakes. If the person chooses liberty and voluntarism and a mistake is made, because they won't be perfect, you know, a small number of people, a very small number of people might suffer. But if you have somebody like Fauci making the mistakes and his cohorts, and you might even have Bill Gates giving his advice on medical things, you know, when that happens, it is big time. And when the finances get involved and people make money off this, it's trillions of dollars, and that brings on, the recession was already here and on its way, and it's going to be here even if they could wave the wand and continue to improve and eliminate some of this lockdown stuff. It's still going to be there, and the cost is horrendous. And believe it or not, no, I know you'll believe it, that the $6 or $7 trillion they've already spent in the past year is going to be paid for one way or the other. It might be paid for by just higher prices, or whatever, but it's not going to be paid for by raising taxes. That thing in New York, I thought it was the silliest thing in the world. We talked a minute ago about people leaving town, and they leave New York and come to Texas, lower taxes, no income tax, and this sort of thing. So and then they amazingly discovered that a lot of people left New York because taxes were too high. A lot of rich people left, and their revenues were going down. The Governor Cuomo, we have to do something about this. Let's raise taxes.
Good job.
They do it.
Yeah.
They do it, and they don't even have a question. And well, the people who leave feel totally helpless because they can't. They're out of the influence. The control is by the monopoly control of the media. So some of them just have to leave. But too many people just say, "Well, we'll go along with it. It'll straighten out." But no, if you accept the idea that government is supposed to care for us, everything that we do, from cradle to grave, and anything we need, it's not going to work because it always ends up expanding itself. The expansion of a welfare warfare state starts low, a little bit here, a little bit here. Like a good example could be the Social Security. 1% of the income it'll never go above this and all, and then finally it turns into a medical program, and really technically it's totally bankrupt, and the medical care is not all that great either when it's so much worked out by the bureaucrats.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to just do a final quick segment. I'm going to blaze through a couple of things here because we want to have some example of people who did it right. And let's look. This is South Dakota. And this is the most recent one. I think it's a day old, maybe. Daily deaths. Look, they had their peak. They had some winter flu. It may have been COVID. It may have been winter flu. We don't know because the problem with false positives that even the WHO talks about now. And look at the next one. Here's the deaths. Here are the daily new cases. They had a peak in November. It's gone down. And here's what Governor Kristi Noem tweeted out the other day. Let's look at that next one. She says, here's the news. South Dakota's unemployment rate has dropped to 3% in December. That's lower than it was before the pandemic. So by doing the right thing, not only did they get over the pandemic without a massive destruction, their economy is in good shape and is doing better than before. And my final thing, because we do want to talk about this, and a lot of people do talk about it, is kind of the hypocrisy. And I think we've always thought that when it started, when Newsom went out and had that fancy dinner and this and that, we thought, this might be a way to get people to come over to our side, showing the hypocrisy. And here it is really in one picture. And I sympathize with the president, with President Biden here. But this was just hours after he signed a mandate. Anyone on federal property must wear a mask. And here he is with his entire family at the Lincoln Memorial. They had a nice photo op. Looks like they were having a nice time. More power to them. Guess what's missing? No masks. And when his spokesperson was asked, he said he's got more important things to worry about. He was celebrating. So, that's how it ends. Speaking of masks, Dr. Paul, don't ask me why because I don't like this store, but I was in Walmart a couple days ago with my daughter, and I saw a huge bargain bin. Guess what it was full of? Masks. Was $7, now $3. I don't usually give economic advice, but if you're heavily invested in mask companies, I might change the portfolio a bit. I will just finally end by saying, please sign up for updates at ronpaulinstitute.org. I will put a link in our description where you can sign up. Free updates. We don't give away or sell your name or rent your name out. I just did an update yesterday talking about President Biden's warmongering towards Syria and Russia and how dangerous it is. So these are free. They're exclusive to people that sign up, and it's also a way, because you never know what's going to happen, it's a way that we can keep in touch with you, and if we have to make a change somewhere, to let you know where you can find the Liberty Report.
Very, very good. If I had a chance at the time, we spoke out against the lockdown all along, and I will continue to do that. But if I had had a chance, you have convinced me, if we were voting on it, I would vote no on lockdown. I would vote yes on liberty, even with some shortcomings. But like I've stated before, the shortcomings become minor. When people run the lives of millions of people and run the country and run the world, you make a mistake, and a handful of people make the mistakes, everybody suffers. But if a smaller number of people make a mistake, if you or I make a mistake about our own personal habits in our lives and things don't go well, I mean, we're the only ones that suffer from it, but or a smaller number of people. But when there's this collectivism, you do it in groups of people, you have to take care of this, and liberty becomes totally collective exercise rather than saying, liberty is something that individuals get at their birth, and it's an issue that people would understand and should be able to use. But the big problem now is that people have been conditioned totally and completely not to assume responsibility, and that's a big thing. People would like to have all the good stuff that comes with a prosperous society, but eventually there's responsibility. Eventually, there has to be some payments. Eventually it gets too big and actually does the opposite of what it's supposed to do. Initially when you start printing money and passing out, and even as it continues to do right now, passing out money still helps some people on the surface. And that's why, the argument in Washington, should we give everybody $1,200 a month extra or $2,400 a month? This is serious stuff economically. No, it isn't. It's just a facade. It's just trying to fool people into thinking that they have no responsibility for themselves. And that is why the big challenge we have is people who become dependent. You can understand that. But the one thing is, if people realize that a free society requires the responsibility, then they may be more reluctant. But what they have to realize, if you do have a free or relatively free society, and we've had bouts of that in our country years ago, it becomes the wealthiest. It's not like, okay, people would like to argue that we who believe in voluntarism and freedom, that people will be out in the streets and people will be poor, there won't be any jobs and anything. And in a way, today it was just shown, Daniel made the point, of how things did better in South Dakota, how things are doing better in Florida than in California and New York. Why don't people listen to the evidence? Oh, that's based on lies, and that's based on fictions, and that's politics. Yeah, well, people should keep their eyes and ears open, and if they're still uncertain about it, just read a little booklet about how Venezuela has done for the last 15 years and what happened with just a little bit of, a touch of socialism isn't too bad. Well, our touch of socialism and welfarism and government controls has now morphed into a monstrous type of problem and a dependency that will not continue unless the American people decide that there's a lot of shortcomings in the way our government is set up, and that we should assume more responsibility along with more liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.